welcome along to the continuation of Property Fraud Awareness Week 2017 in association and powered by Anthony Gold Solicitors, and I'm joined by one of their team, Beth Holden. And Beth, today we're going to talk about the issue of identity fraud in property, because actually rental properties are very, very vulnerable to this, aren't they?
Yes, that's right. Yes, quite often fraudsters particularly want to target rental properties because that gives them an opportunity to put some associates into the property, and then they can work with them to get access to it, show people around, hand over keys, let people in to do surveys if they were looking to buy it. So they're very attractive to fraudsters.
And particularly also unencumbered properties. So I think that's a good warning sign to a property owner, to a landlord. If their property is empty and it doesn't have a mortgage on it, it could be even more vulnerable.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, in a normal conveyancing transaction, when a genuine seller is trying to sell a property and they've got a mortgage, they need to apply to their mortgage company to get redemption statements, and they'll have a unique account number which only they will have access to. So they'll pass that on to their conveyancing solicitor, and their solicitor will be able to pay off the mortgage from the proceeds of sale, and that's a usual part of a general conveyancing practice. So obviously if there's no mortgage on a property, the fraudster doesn't have to worry about obtaining that information and not having that information, and they can just sell the property very quickly, often looking to get cash and do a quick deal, and it's incredibly attractive prospect for them.
And you're seeing an increase in this type of fraud, and I certainly have seen in the media as well more and more stories coming out of identity fraud, where somebody claims to be the owner of the property and sells it, and obviously benefits from the sale of that property. But you know, there's two sides to it. There's the person selling the property, that could be defrauded, but also the buyer can be defrauded as well, because they pay for something that doesn't actually pass title to them. So, you know, landlords have to be careful on both fronts, don't they?
Yes, yes. I mean, if you're a landlord, then your property would be targeted by somebody who is purporting to own it and would actually be purporting to sell it. If you're the buyer and you're looking to buy the property, then you're going to be dealing with a fraudster who has taken the identity of a real owner. So of course the purchaser is at real risk that they won't get property and that they'll lose all their money. But the landlord or the true owner's identity has been stolen, and quite often that is usually through obtaining false passports or driving licenses, getting utility bills, because that's another advantage for fraudsters who apply to rent a property, is that they can get utility bills in the name of an individual and get details supposedly to prove their credentials as owners. So yes, it's very concerning for people. One of the things that's particularly prevalent, I think, at the moment is people applying for passports using deed poll. So they'll actually get their name changed into the name of the registered proprietor, and then apply for a passport or some sort of official identification document, having obtained that deed poll. So one of the warning signs for purchasers particularly is that if they get any information at all about that person's, the seller's name having changed recently, then that should really put them on alert, or if they've recently applied for a passport or something like that. It is something that is very difficult to insist as a purchaser to see that information, and there's been a recent case which has upheld the practice that, generally speaking, the solicitors that act for purchasers are not under an obligation to actually obtain the identification documents of the supposed seller. But there is an increasing awareness within the legal profession, and I think among estate agents and lenders, that they're very keen to get to the bottom of the credentials of the individual that is selling the property. And so these are things that an astute buyer would want to look out for.
Indeed, and also to come to a specialist solicitor that understands the conveyancing and that will have that duty of care.
Yes, of course. I mean, if you're unfortunate enough to be an individual who loses money to a fraudster in attempting to purchase a property, then often the money will be lost to you because the person at the other end of the transaction is
Long
is long gone. Yes, they've gone off with the money, so you're not going to get much chance of getting it back from them. Obviously, the police will get involved and try to stop it, and there should be immediate. Hopefully, if things come to light quickly, then you may even be able to put a stop on a transaction going through a bank. But that's very rare, and so generally the purchaser is left looking to their solicitors for recourse, and the solicitor would have a duty of care to protect them. And so if there is any suggestion that solicitor hasn't done that, and it would have to be looked at quite carefully by a lawyer, then there may be some prospect of recovery on that front.
Now, just to finish really, what kind of simple things can property owners do to protect themselves from this type of fraud? Because there's obviously the free land registry alert, which is well worth signing up for, isn't it?
Yes, I would certainly recommend that. I think if you're a landlord and you've got an empty property, or you're letting your property out, or you've got no mortgage on your property and it's somewhere that you don't live, then it's very well worth signing up to that service, which would mean that the land registry would notify you if anybody tried to carry out searches against your property. And generally the land registry will always help to facilitate anti-fraud measures. They can offer restrictions against title, so that if anybody tries to apply for any mortgage or loan, or take steps to register a new owner, then they have to prove that they've actually notified the person whose name is on the register. And most fundamentally, and it's such a simple and easy free thing to do, is just to make sure that if you're not living at the property, you've actually got an address registered with the land registry, which is where you actually live, so that any communication from the land registry is sure to get to you. And the land registry also accept email as well as an official form of communication, so that is very important.
Very good tip there. You've recently been involved in quite a high profile case in this regard, haven't you, where you managed to get redress. Just can you give us a quick overview of that?
Yes, certainly. And my client was unfortunately the purchaser who paid nearly £500,000 over to purchase a property that was marketed to him by a fraudster. So he took an action against the solicitors that acted for the fraudster, because they paid the money to that individual and no valid completion took effect. And he also took an action against his own firm of licensed conveyancers, who were responsible for protecting him, and they had paid the money on to the fraudster's solicitors. And although the fraudster's solicitors were not dishonest, the purpose of the trust under which my client's own conveyancers held the money was purely to facilitate valid completion, and that didn't take place. And so we said that there was a breach of trust and negligence, and we succeeded in getting 100% recovery for him of the purchase money plus interest. That transaction took place under the 1998 Code for Completion, which governs that conveyancing transactions at that time. The Code for Completion has subsequently changed, and the Law Society have removed a specific trust obligation by sellers' solicitors to hold money on trust pending completion in certain circumstances. And so that has actually made it more difficult and challenging for purchasers suing the seller's solicitors. And of course there isn't any contractual relationship between the purchaser and the seller's solicitors, because the seller's solicitor wasn't actually acting for them. So it really is pushing the focus back onto the purchaser's own solicitors, and going forwards we're seeing more and more cases where purchasers are suing their own solicitors in negligence. But the two cases that followed mine, where unfortunately the purchaser didn't succeed in one of them, the purchaser didn't succeed in recovering the money, are going up to the Court of Appeal. So we're following that with interest to see how that evolves.
Indeed. So as ever, we're talking really that prevention is always less expensive, less heartache
Absolutely.
than cure. So I think I'm sure you're joining me in thanking Beth for her insights there. Some very, very simple tips there to prevent this kind of identity fraud, which as we said is on the increase. So I do hope you found this chat with Beth useful, and thank you very much, Beth. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you.